Peace does not arrive in the way most people imagine. It is rarely gentle at the beginning, and it almost never feels rewarding at first contact. When external noise fades and emotional dependency loosens its grip, the mind does not immediately experience relief. Instead, it experiences withdrawal. What many label as loneliness in this stage is not the absence of peace, but the first evidence that peace is actually beginning. Human beings are conditioned to live outwardly. From a young age, attention is trained to seek stimulation, reassurance, recognition, and reaction. Noise becomes normal, movement becomes safety, emotional exchange becomes identity. Over time, this conditioning becomes so deep that stillness feels unnatural. When the familiar sources of noise are removed, constant conversation, digital stimulation, emotional validation, or external pressure, the nervous system reacts. The silence feels like something has gone missing. The mind searches for what it used to lean on, and finding nothing creates discomfort. This discomfort is often misunderstood. People assume peace should feel pleasant, warm, and emotionally satisfying. When it does not, they conclude that something is wrong, that they are regressing, or that isolation is harming them. In reality, the discomfort is not caused by peace itself. It is caused by the sudden absence of distraction. Just as a room feels empty after loud music stops, the inner world feels hollow when habitual noise disappears. That hollowness is not damage, it is space. The mind resists space because space exposes dependency. Without constant input, thoughts become louder, unresolved emotions rise, and self-awareness increases. This confrontation feels uncomfortable because it removes excuses. When there is no external noise to blame, the inner state becomes visible. Many people have never truly met themselves without interference. That meeting can feel lonely because the mind expected company in the form of stimulation, not presence. Loneliness at this stage is not social loneliness, it is psychological withdrawal. It is the mind realizing it no longer has immediate access to the patterns that once soothed it. Emotional dependency weakens, and the nervous system has not yet learned how to self-regulate. This creates unease. The body and mind ask, "What now?" That question marks the threshold between unconscious living and conscious peace. Most people turn back at this point. They refill the silence with noise, not because it nourishes them, but because it is familiar. Familiar patterns, even harmful ones, feel safer than unfamiliar calm. This is why peace is rare. Not because it is unreachable, but because its entrance is uncomfortable. It requires the willingness to stay when there is nothing to distract you from yourself. If one remains in this discomfort, instead of escaping it, something important happens. Observation replaces reaction. The mind begins to see how often it reaches outward for stability. Thoughts are noticed rather than followed. Emotions are felt without being dramatized. The discomfort slowly transforms from threat into information. It teaches where attachment existed, where dependency formed, and where identity was externally constructed. This phase feels lonely because identity has not yet reassembled. When external reference points fall away, the old sense of self dissolves. Roles lose their grip. Emotional hooks weaken. Until inner structure develops, there is a temporary sense of groundlessness. But groundlessness is not emptiness. It is transition. It is the space between reliance and self-sufficiency. True peace is not the presence of comfort. It is the absence of inner resistance. But resistance must be seen before it can dissolve. That seeing happens in silence. That silence feels uncomfortable because it reveals friction. The mind resists its own exposure. Yet this exposure is necessary. Without it, peace remains a concept rather than an experience. As stillness deepens, the nervous system adapts. What once felt lonely begins to feel stable. The need for constant reassurance diminishes. Thoughts slow, not because they are forced to stop, but because they are no longer fueled by restlessness. Emotions arise and pass without demanding action. The inner environment becomes less reactive, more responsive. At this stage, peace no longer feels like absence. It feels like grounded presence. The earlier discomfort is recognized as a withdrawal from dependency, not a lack of connection. The mind learns that it does not need external noise to exist comfortably. It learns to rest in awareness rather than stimulation. This is why peace is often mistaken for loneliness at first. The mind confuses quiet with isolation because it equates activity with connection. In truth, peace is connection without attachment. It is presence without performance. It does not entertain the ego, so the ego initially feels excluded. But what is excluded is not the self, it is unnecessary noise. Over time, peace reveals its value. Decisions become clearer because they are not driven by emotional urgency. Relationships become healthier because they are no longer used for validation. Solitude becomes nourishing instead of threatening. The inner world becomes a place one can remain without discomfort. Peace does not announce itself with pleasure. It announces itself with honesty. It removes what you leaned on before you are ready to replace it. That removal feels uncomfortable, even lonely, but it is precise. It strips dependency so that stability can be rebuilt from within. Those who understand this do not rush the process. They recognize discomfort as a sign of progress, not failure. They allow the nervous system to recalibrate. They observe without judgment. And slowly, what once felt like loneliness becomes strength. Peace, in its early stages, asks for endurance. It asks for patience. It asks for trust in a process that does not immediately reward you. But those who stay discover something priceless. A state of being that does not collapse when noise disappears. A mind that does not panic in silence. A presence that remains steady regardless of external conditions. What begins as discomfort ends as freedom. And the loneliness that once frightened the mind becomes the doorway through which true peace is entered. Loneliness is often misunderstood because it is experienced at the surface but created at a deeper level. When people feel lonely, they assume something essential is missing, that connection has been lost, or that life has become smaller. In reality, the loneliness that arises on the path of inner growth is not a final state. It is a passage. It is not a place where one remains, but a condition one moves through as the inner structure reorganizes itself. What feels empty at first is not emptiness in the true sense. It is unoccupied space. And unoccupied space feels uncomfortable only to a mind that has never learned how to rest without stimulation. Most human beings fill every gap in their lives with noise. Conversation, activity, ambition, entertainment, emotional exchange. When these fillers are removed, even temporarily, the absence is labeled as loneliness. But absence is not deprivation, it is preparation. Loneliness appears when old patterns no longer function, but new stability has not yet formed. This is why it feels fragile and uncertain. External supports that once defined identity, roles, approval, constant interaction, begin to lose their authority. The mind expects the familiar comfort of these patterns, and when they do not respond, it interprets the silence as loss. Yet nothing essential has been taken away. What is dissolving is dependency. In this transitional phase, the mind becomes more visible to itself. Without distraction, thoughts reveal their repetitive nature. Emotional habits surface without being triggered by external events. This can feel unsettling because it exposes how much of one's inner life was previously outsourced. Loneliness here is the mind standing on its own for the first time, unsure of its balance. Many people mistake this uncertainty for failure. They believe something has gone wrong, that detachment has turned into isolation. But isolation closes, transition opens. Loneliness that arises during inner development is expansive, not contracting. It stretches awareness. It creates room where constant engagement once existed. That room initially feels hollow because it has not yet been inhabited by clarity. Clarity does not arrive immediately because the mind must first slow down enough to perceive it. Space must exist before structure can form. Just as a field must be cleared before anything can be built, The inner world must experience openness before stability can arise. Loneliness is the clearing. It is not meant to be lived in permanently. It is meant to prepare the ground. During this phase, self-trust begins to form quietly. Without external reference points, decisions must come from internal observation. Feelings must be acknowledged without being acted upon impulsively. Thoughts must be questioned rather than believed automatically. This process is subtle and often uncomfortable, but it strengthens inner alignment. Each moment of remaining present without escaping reinforces the ability to rely on oneself. What once felt like emptiness gradually reveals itself as spaciousness. In that spaciousness, reactions lose intensity. Emotional urgency softens. The constant need for reassurance diminishes. The mind learns that it can experience uncertainty without collapsing. This learning is the foundation of inner stability. Loneliness, then, is not a destination because it dissolves as capacity increases. It exists only while the mind adapts to standing independently. Once this adaptation occurs, the same conditions that once produced loneliness begin to produce calm. Silence becomes supportive rather than threatening. Solitude becomes restorative rather than painful. This transformation does not occur through force or positive thinking. It occurs through endurance and honest observation. When loneliness arises, the instinct is to escape it, to fill the space with something familiar. But staying with it allows the nervous system to regulate itself. It teaches the mind that presence does not require constant engagement. Over time, this lesson rewires perception. As self-trust strengthens, the need to define oneself through others weakens. Relationships no longer function as emotional crutches. They become choices rather than necessities. This shift does not reduce connection, it purifies it. Interactions become more genuine because they are no longer driven by fear of being alone. Inner stability grows in this space. Stability does not mean rigidity. It means resilience. It means the ability to remain centered regardless of external conditions. Loneliness cannot survive in a stable inner environment because stability provides its own sense of companionship. Awareness becomes sufficient. Presence becomes grounding. When this stage is understood, loneliness loses its threat. It is recognized as a signal of transition rather than a verdict on one's life. Instead of resisting it, one allows it to do its work. The mind learns patience. The body learns safety in stillness. The heart learns that connection does not vanish when noise fades. Eventually, what once felt empty becomes full, not with stimulation but with clarity. Thoughts are fewer but more precise. Emotions are felt but not overwhelming. Decisions arise from alignment rather than urgency. The inner world becomes a place of rest instead of restlessness. Loneliness disappears not because people return or circumstances change, but because the internal foundation has been built. The mind no longer demands constant external input to feel whole. It recognizes that wholeness was never dependent on fullness. This is why loneliness is transitional. It marks the space between old dependency and new independence. It is uncomfortable because growth often is, but it is also purposeful. It prepares the individual to engage with the world without being consumed by it. Those who understand this do not fear loneliness. They respect it. They move through it slowly, allowing clarity to form naturally. They do not rush to replace what has fallen away. They allow the space to teach them how to stand. And once that lesson is learned, loneliness has no reason to stay. It has fulfilled its role. What remains is inner stability, quiet, steady, and sufficient. Silence is often avoided not because it is empty, but because it is revealing. When external noise fades and the environment becomes still, the mind does not become quiet immediately. Instead, it becomes exposed. Thoughts grow clearer, emotional patterns become more visible, and inner habits that were previously masked by constant activity rise to the surface. This exposure is not accidental. Silence functions like a mirror, reflecting what has always been present but rarely seen. Most people live in a state of continuous distraction. Movement, sound, conversation, and stimulation keep attention directed outward. In this outward focus, inner conditioning operates unchecked. Habits form, fears solidify, and attachments deepen without being examined. Silence interrupts this pattern. When there is nothing to engage with externally, the mind turns inward by necessity. What it finds there can feel uncomfortable, even overwhelming, because it reveals the accumulated residue of past experiences, beliefs, and emotional reactions. Unresolved fears often surface first. These fears may not have clear causes in the present moment, yet they carry intensity. They arise because silence removes the usual buffers that kept them dormant. Fear depends on avoidance to survive. When avoidance is no longer possible, fear seeks expression. This does not mean something is wrong, it means something is being seen. Fear loses power when it is observed without reaction. Habits also become obvious in stillness. Patterns of thought repeat themselves with precision. The same judgments, the same worries, the same self-narratives appear again and again. In daily busyness, these habits blend into background noise. In silence, they stand out. This visibility is essential. One cannot discipline what one cannot see. Awareness precedes change. Attachments reveal themselves in subtle ways. The mind reaches for comfort, even when nothing is missing. It craves stimulation, reassurance, or emotional response. In stillness, these cravings become noticeable. One observes the urge to check, to distract, to engage, to escape. These urges are expressions of attachment, not to objects or people alone, but to feelings and identities. Silence exposes how deeply the mind relies on external input to regulate its internal state. This exposure can feel threatening because it removes the illusion of control. Many believe they are calm only because they have not been tested by stillness. When silence reveals agitation, the mind assumes peace has been lost. In truth, peace has not yet been trained. What appears in silence is not newly created disturbance, it is previously hidden disturbance. Silence does not create inner conflict, it uncovers it. The purpose of this uncovering is not punishment or suffering, it is understanding. Conditioning cannot be dismantled through suppression or denial. It must be recognized first. When fears, habits, and attachments surface, they offer information. They show where attention has been conditioned, where reactions have become automatic, and where awareness has been absent. Discipline begins here, not with force, but with consistency. Discipline means returning attention to observation rather than reaction. When a fear arises, it is felt without storytelling. When a habit repeats, it is noticed without judgment. When attachment pulls, it is acknowledged without obedience. This is not passive acceptance, it is active training. Stillness provides the environment for this training. In silence, the mind has fewer excuses. There is no external stimulus to blame. Responsibility returns inward. This responsibility can feel heavy at first, but it is also empowering. It shifts agency from circumstances to awareness. Many people abandon silence at this stage. They interpret the surfacing of discomfort as failure. They believe stillness is making them worse. In reality, stillness is making them honest. It removes the filters that previously protected the ego from self-examination. This honesty is essential for growth. Over time, something changes. As fears are observed without feeding them, their intensity diminishes. As habits are seen clearly, they lose their unconscious momentum. As attachments are recognized, they loosen. This process does not eliminate thought or emotion. It transforms the relationship to them. The mind becomes less reactive, more responsive. Silence then shifts from being confrontational to supportive. What once felt like exposure begins to feel like clarity. The inner landscape becomes familiar. One learns its patterns, its triggers, its tendencies. This familiarity breeds stability. There is less surprise, less inner chaos, because nothing is being avoided. Stillness also reveals strength. By remaining present with discomfort, the mind learns resilience. It discovers that it can experience fear without being controlled by it. It learns that urges pass if they are not acted upon. This realization builds trust in awareness itself. Understanding inner conditioning is not about analyzing the past endlessly. It is about recognizing patterns in the present moment. Silence makes the present moment visible. It shows how the mind moves when it is not entertained. This knowledge is practical. It informs how one speaks, acts, and responds in daily life. Discipline, in this context, is not rigid control. It is gentle persistence. It is the willingness to return to observation again and again. It is choosing awareness over impulse. Silence supports this choice by reducing external interference. Eventually, silence no longer feels like a challenge. It becomes a refuge. The mind, once restless, learns to settle. Not because thoughts disappear, but because they no longer dominate. Fear loses urgency. Habits lose authority. Attachments lose their grip. What silence reveals, when met with patience and discipline, does not harm. It heals. It brings the unconscious into awareness, where it can be understood and transformed. The process may be uncomfortable, but it is precise. It exposes exactly what needs attention, no more and no less. In this way, silence becomes a teacher. It does not speak, yet it shows everything. And those who are willing to remain in its presence discover that what they feared was not silence itself, but what silence would reveal. True peace is rare not because it is difficult to access, but because it is often sought in the wrong place. Many believe peace comes from favorable outcomes, supportive people, or stable circumstances. As long as things go according to expectation, they feel calm. When conditions shift, that calm disappears. What they experience is not peace, but temporary comfort. True peace is different. It is not given by circumstances, and therefore it cannot be taken by them. When peace is cultivated internally, it is no longer tied to external control. This cultivation requires training attention, observing the mind, and gradually loosening dependency on what cannot be guaranteed. Most inner disturbance comes from attachment to results, wanting things to happen a certain way, wanting others to behave in specific ways, wanting life to confirm one's expectations. As long as peace is negotiated through these conditions, it remains fragile. Internal peace begins with recognizing how often the mind seeks stability outside itself. It looks for reassurance in approval, certainty in plans, and safety in predictability. These things are not wrong, but they are unreliable. People change, outcomes shift, circumstances evolve without warning. When peace depends on these elements, it is always under threat. The training of true peace involves withdrawing this dependency slowly and consciously. It does not mean rejecting relationships or disengaging from life. It means observing the inner reactions that arise when expectations are not met. Instead of reacting outwardly, attention is brought inward. One learns to remain present with discomfort rather than trying to eliminate it through control. As this practice continues, a subtle shift occurs. The mind becomes less reactive. Situations that once caused agitation are seen more clearly. Emotional responses still arise, but they no longer dictate behavior. This gap between stimulus and response is where peace begins to stabilize. What makes this peace priceless is its independence. It does not require protection. Praise does not inflate it. Criticism does not destroy it. Loss does not erase it. This does not mean one becomes indifferent or emotionally numb. It means emotions are experienced without being allowed to dominate the inner state. People often fear that internal peace will make them passive or detached. In reality, it makes action more precise. When peace is not at risk, decisions are clearer. One can engage fully without desperation. Effort becomes intentional rather than compulsive. Because true peace does not rely on outcomes, failure loses its power. Success no longer defines self-worth. Life's fluctuations are met with steadiness instead of resistance. This steadiness is not forced. It is trained through repeated observation of the mind's tendencies. As inner peace deepens, relationships change. They become less transactional. There is less need to extract validation or security from others. Connection becomes a choice rather than a requirement for stability. This freedom strengthens relationships rather than weakening them, because interaction is no longer driven by fear of loss. Circumstances also lose their authority over the inner state. External chaos does not automatically produce internal chaos. One can acknowledge difficulty without becoming consumed by it. This does not remove challenges, but it changes how they are met. True peace is priceless because nothing external can steal it. It cannot be manipulated by others. It cannot be threatened by uncertainty. It does not collapse when plans fail. This kind of peace provides a foundation that remains intact regardless of what unfolds. The cultivation of such peace requires patience and discipline. It is not achieved through avoidance or suppression. It is built through awareness, through repeatedly choosing presence over reaction. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to fight every discomfort. It learns that stability can exist even in uncertainty. Once this understanding settles, peace is no longer a goal to be reached. It becomes the ground from which life is lived. Action arises from clarity rather than urgency. Rest exists even within effort. Silence remains even in movement. This is why true peace is priceless. Not because it feels pleasant all the time, but because it endures. It cannot be taken by people, outcomes, or circumstances, because it was never given by them in the first place.